All right. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you had a good lunch break. There are far less of you, which tells me it was a good lunch break. There's a bunch of people out there networking. I personally had 3 cocktails, so I'm having a feeling this afternoon's session is going to be a hell of a lot more entertaining. But speaking of entertainment, look, I can't even shut them up. They're making more noise over here as it is. We are going to be kicking off this afternoon by what I believe to be actually one of the hardest slots. Right after lunch, we're going to wake people up. I don't know if you can tell. I'm trying to pump some energy into this room. There we go. All right. So let's talk about one of my favorite topics, greenwashing. No, sorry. We're going to talk about the anti-greenwash. I told you this afternoon was going to be way more entertaining. Ethan Pierse is from Series.E Media. He is here because Chris got COVID. That's what he told me. That's what he told me off stage. So we're going to talk about that. But backing sustainable innovation, best practices in green tech investing. Please welcome to the stage Ethan Pierse, our moderator for this session.
Very good. Can you hear me okay? All right. Thank you for what was mostly a supportive introduction. I appreciate that significantly, Dan. And we're going to have a great, exciting, nothing is more exciting after lunch and alcohol than talking about green tech investing. So let's do that. Let's dive in. I would love to welcome to stage all 3 of these wonderful panelists. Come on up. I will introduce them individually, but we have Daria, Saharova, Nick Delaforge, and Aline Vedder. Welcome. Have a seat. And we will dive in. So, yes, I am the batter up, I guess, for the second stage come in and take over. I do actually know quite a bit about the subject, but you are the rock stars of this panel, so I'm excited to get to help guide a conversation around green tech investing. Who's having a good day so far? Good morning. Exciting? Yay? Woo. All right. You've got energy. That's lovely. So let's just kind of, the topic about green tech investing, green tech in general, sustainability, climate tech, lots of hashtags. I thought the first thing we could do was maybe define that, but just to kind of back up the idea, because I think context is important. Daria, you are the co-founder and investor at World Fund, and you've had 20 years of experience in entrepreneurship and finance, particularly in the prop tech and green kind of energy tech verticals. Let's see, Aline, you are principal at Lakestar, where you are focused on investments in healthcare and climate and sustainability. And Nick, you are the co-founder and general partner at Planet 8 Ventures, focused on European green tech. Correct?
Perfect.
Welcome. So let's start with definitions. For you, what is green tech, climate tech, sustainability? Lots of people are defining these things, greenwashing, as it were. What to you matters with this idea of green tech?
Should I start?
Yeah, please.
Thank you. I think today we're going to talk about greenwashing a lot because he just started and kicked off with that. So for us, I think at World Fund we define climate tech along one KPI, and these are the emissions. So we talk about decarbonization of industries, and everything we kind of look at, we look through the lens of the CO2 kind of emissions reduction potential. We don't talk about impact. For us, the word impact is banned, so everyone has to buy me beer when they say it. So we talk about climate performance. Maybe it's semantics, but in the end of the day, it shows that as a venture capital firm, we can be, kind of financially driven, but also climate performance driven. Right. So everything we do is about the reduction of emissions, and every company we invest in has to pass the threshold of at least 100 megaton per year of a reduction potential, which is about 1/8 of Germany a year, or 20 million solar panels kind of equals.
Very cool. Nick, same thing, definition, and especially because you in your bio specifically say European green tech, and European startups do it better. So European green tech, what for you? How do you see green tech as a space?
Yeah, so I think that's the differentiation to climate tech that we at Planet A, as the name implies, we try to look at the biosphere as a whole and also have that focus on not exclusively narrowing down on climate change, because We like to think, and based on the model of the planetary boundaries by Rockström, that there is 9 of them, and climate change is one of them, but they are all very much so interconnected. And given the fact that we significantly have to overwork everything we do in terms of how we produce energy, get from A to B, and so on, we'll have to overwork everything, and that we would like to do better on the element of climate change, of course, but also do no harm in the other dimensions. So that is waste reductions, resource savings, and biodiversity protection. And so green tech for us combines all of that. And we could, for example, also invest into something which is only having a significant impact, and there we go with the beer. Only doing significant impact.
Well every time.
On the biodiversity side of things.
Aline.
So for us, I think it's a combination of what both of you guys do. Climate tech actually is all kind of technologies that contribute to the decarbonization of our planet, and that for us translates into different sub-verticals and sectors, and things that we're particularly interested in is anything energy related. We also look quite closely at anything carbon related. We started to look at the whole topic of biodiversity too, so that's also an interesting one. And I'd say from the general fund perspective, it's a bit more about some things that we exclude. So for example, anything very hardware related is quite interesting in my point of view, especially from the impact perspective. However, that's still something that we're struggling a bit with in terms of investment, so we're more focused on anything digital.
And so, Daria, you mentioned this in part of what you said there. I think one of the most interesting discussion points around green tech and climate tech and sustainability in general is we are now at a point where green tech is good business, not just doing good. Like, we're getting to a point where there are reasons that this makes better sense for a company to choose the sustainable green option than to not, which then takes us into this idea of, from an investment perspective, are we now getting to a place where this is not just philanthropy? I need money for my green tech startup 5 years ago. You had to find somebody who just wanted to throw money at you that didn't expect to get it back because this was just donations, the philanthropic side of this whole thing. What are your thoughts on crossing from that historical kind of place of this was to do good, but was not a good financial decision to back these kind of companies? What do you think about that, Daria?
Well, I think it's still like this connotation, of impact investing is still very close to philanthropy, right? And it's fantastic. We should do that because there are a lot of, industries, a lot of products, a lot of services to invest into without, a financial venture capital perspective. But if you do VC, for me, it always has to be both. It's not planet over people, people over planet, and profit somewhere around that. It's kind of one. Right? So for us, as I said, the climate performance potential, the CPP, is a financial KPI. This is how we operate, and we believe that the companies with the highest CPP and the highest decarbonization potential are going to be the ones who are going to be the most valuable financially, which of course now Bill Gates said and everyone said, but we actually started to believe in that before they said that. And I think there is a change, happening. But in my experience, it depends on which industry you look into. We talk to a lot of very old-fashioned institutional investors, for example. They all got their mandates to allocate in climate tech, but still, there is still a question mark. So for me, it's changing, and it should be changing, and it's better than 5 years ago, but it's still not completely there.
I can echo what Daria said. We are on an adoption cycle, and there is, of course, a couple of companies and institutions which have gotten it, but there is also very frustrating moments. So a couple of weeks ago, I was having the chance to talk about this topic with a group of insurers, and these were people from the actual insurance business, but also from the innovator labs. And at some point, the discussion started to focus on how much paper is being used in printing, and that this is one of the biggest sustainability measures. And that is just frustrating, because the amount of capital that insurers can funnel into the right direction is just absurd. So everything that we three do is peanuts compared to that. And I feel like there is still not, the concept of responsibility that capital has is still not completely understood, while others, of course, do. So, for example, we talk to a lot of corporates, and some of the corporates, they for example, one of the German automotive OEMs, they claim to calculate with an internal price of CO2 of 100 tons, of 100 euros per ton. But we know that internally they are calculating more so with 200 euros per ton, because they understand that to shift now towards a sustainable company is going to pay off in the long term. So I think we're on the cycle, and the spectrum is very broad.
Aline.
Yeah, I agree. So I think it does take time, obviously, but then again, if I compare it just from the fund perspective, so myself, for example, I started out in traditional venture capital, then I moved to an impact fund, and then there was the big question, why would you do that? It's like completely different animal, it's not a venture capital anymore, and I thought, well, I don't really think so. I think these topics, they can be VC topics as well, and now I moved back to the traditional venture capital fund, and there was no question at all whether climate investments or climate tech is anything that's backable with VC money. So I think it takes time, but then again, that's all over the course of 6 years. So a lot has happened in that time.
So,
Can
yes,
I add
please,
something
Daria.
to that?
Yeah.
I agree, but then what you said was we basically focus on digital models,
Yeah.
right? And if you look like what
Yeah.
kind of technology is going to really make the biggest change, this is a lot of hardware, this is a lot of long-term investing in deep tech, right? So everyone is talking about climate tech, but then in the end, who is actually deploying money in really disruptive, a little bit maybe like in a non-software based and non-digital based purely companies? I think that is still a huge gap we have.
Yeah, which is also a good thing, right? Because if all the VC funds would all look at hardware now as well, I think it's okay to have some kind of disparities there and some kind of different degrees in terms of what innovation you back. And I think it's probably also, again, a matter of time, because I do think like in a year or two or even 3, we'll also look at hardware, pretty sure.
So one of the things we talked about in our prep call was this idea that generally an innovation venture capital showing up is what moves more rapidly from the beginning of an idea of something's cool to it really beginning to scale and become much more adopted across the market. In this space, what we talked about was that regulation is potentially what has to change before we can really scale a lot of, we talked about not all of the places along the green tech and sustainability side of things, but an awful lot of verticals. Companies spend a lot of time trying to, or working towards being able to do the business they finally want to do by having to go through all of the regulatory hoops and jumping around and figuring it out, or even to get the frameworks passed so that legally they can do things. So for your perspectives, what do you feel like the role of venture capital really is in a lot of these green tech verticals where there's still a lot of potential friction on a regulatory side to be able to do what we want to do? Who wants to tackle that first?
I'm happy to.
Nick.
So really, like, not proprietary knowledge on our side, but I really would like to hint towards a study which recently was published by BCG and the World Economic Forum, and they are very clear in their findings. They say sustainable companies are able to charge a premium on top of the prices. They are able to get better talent and have a better talent retention, and also that the regulatory risks they are exposed to are significantly lower than non-sustainable companies. And I know it's all in the flux, but I think unfortunately we won't see less consequences of climate change over the next decade. So we will very likely be forced to, or we will see stronger regulation on all ends, may that be on the end of plastic taxes, how we think about a carbon economy, and so on. And I think in a scenario, and don't want to paint too dire pictures, in a scenario where this becomes, if we don't care about this anymore at all, then I think it doesn't matter if we have venture or not. Then I think then we're in a very dire place.
Other thoughts?
I think regulation and venture capital, it's an interesting interplay because, for example, if I look at the health sector, there was a lot of regulation that actually followed after startups innovated and changed certain business models. And afterwards, the regulation opened up and made these innovations possible. And I think in climate, it can be similar. So, for example, if I look at the whole space of carbon accounting and the voluntary carbon market, I think it's hugely unregulated, obviously. And I think there, if you look at the new players that really open up this market and try to make it more transparent, and also, again, for companies, bring them a bit more into the spotlight and bringing more attention to bad credits and low quality credits and so on, I think that's also a field where regulation probably will follow due to innovation coming from the VC and startup side.
Daria?
Just to take the devil's advocate role here, I would say, no role for a VC. We can't do shit if the regulator won't move, because in the end of the day, these are not it's not only about being highly regulated. It's also about the lobbyism, the companies still being able, like the big food tech companies, the oil companies. There are so many doing fantastic lobby work, and we have to, as VCs, start, kind of building bridges to the politics. And I think and understand the role and be. I don't think that the next step is to influence in co-design, right? But just to know what is happening, to know what has to happen, to have a voice and to create this voice and this as an industry as well, to create the bridge. I think that's super important for this space.
And I think it's incredibly important to also remember that an awful lot of politicians or elected officials are not necessarily against anything in tech or innovation or in the specific area, but they don't necessarily know the details. We assume that because they have been elected to a position or they've been given a particular mandate that they might understand all these things, and we see it in tech very often that they don't actually have always a significant understanding of the technology or the risks and opportunities and needs of these things. It's not a criticism. They just need to be, somebody needs to take them along the path and explain things and educate them. And I think that we've got the lobbyists on one side for the historical business models that green tech can disrupt, and we have all the actors on your side that are trying to pull that along. So I think that's a big piece of, you're there to defend this in front of other people as well, not potentially just invest in the companies, that we have to bring the market with us.
Maybe
yes, please, Nick.
One thing to add, I think what I sometimes find in these discussions is the innate desire to single out the silver bullet in all of this, like the piece which is going to solve it all. And that's very likely not going to be the case. We are trying to assemble an airplane mid-air, and we need every part of it. We need regulation, which is going to follow changing customer behavior, which needs to be informed by the media and so on. And it is a complex system. And even anticipated regulation can, of course, already have significant impact on how markets function, right?
So then maybe to just talk, since we have 4 minutes left, our last point that we discussed we'd like to dive into. 20 minutes goes fast. So one of the drivers, obviously, of green tech adoption is the fact that the market wants to do this. We talked about energy, basically, independence at this point now for Europe, current events going on, changing the dialogue around where is our energy coming from, how is that being dealt with, prices going up. What are your thoughts on this? If this takes us into any kind of a recession, if it takes us into a more complicated energy situation, what are your thoughts about what that means towards green tech? Because will the market want green solutions if everything else is more expensive, if they need to make a choice between eating and making green choices versus, do I fill the car with gas, or do I buy that electric car I was hoping to buy, or or do I walk because I decide to take, or I take the bike, or all those things could very much change because of the economic issues we're currently facing and the potential energy independence. Your thoughts on that topic?
Well, I think, look, it's too early to say, right? I think as humans, we are very habit-driven, and we tend to forget disasters quickly and go back to how we behaved before. Still, the jury is still out there how the 2 years of Corona are going to change our behavior or not. And I'm talking about substantial. So I think the current political crisis and the war has put this conversation on a different level and engaged all of the different stakeholders. What Nick just said is exactly that. There is no silver bullet, and it's an ecosystem. We are an ecosystem, and there are so many players and actors. So I think that pushes it in different layers, and the urgency of making a decision. We can, we saw it in the last 2 years. If things have to, if you have to, out of the sudden, everyone could close the whole world, right? So I think we should take the advantage, if you could say it in the context of such a, crisis. We should take the advantage and see that close, but it has to be decided and then consequently executed if there is a change, because people tend to fall back.
Nick?
I think we need to have a very differentiated view on this, because I think there's definitely going to be a dial back in sustainable solutions in some fields. So for example, I don't know, looking at how we manufacture on a certain level, or how looking at the mobility space, for example. Where we will definitely continue to see that green premium is when it comes to primary energy, because all of the solutions we're currently thinking about, may it be for the production or fueling of reactors to grow lab-grown meat, may that be for the production of hydrogen, for e-kerosene, and so on. All of this is dependent on how we can produce energy. And like all the energy companies that we're currently talking to, they have the same narrative, which is, and that's maybe the best part about all of this, is that Putin has basically been the employee of the decade. Like the push that this gave to the entire industry is just unprecedented, and energy independency in Europe will become of the utmost importance. And so I think this is where we will see innovation through and through.
So 28 seconds, Aline.
Yeah, so I also, to wrap it up, I'd say I'm hugely optimistic that these kind of topics are going to have more spotlight and more relevance. And also, if I look at it from the impact perspective, it's again these topics, health, climate, and so on, that are the very recession-proof ones. So I would guess, even though there might be some short-term trade-offs, like consumers not being able to pay a premium for certain sustainable products, the bigger topics will remain and they'll be addressed.
Brilliant, right on time. So if it didn't happen, if it's not on Twitter, it didn't happen. So obligatory selfies for this Rockstar panel. And that is it. Please give a round of applause for these amazing, amazing people and their thoughts. Thank you.